Welcome, everyone. This is the DFS Bum. All right, we have made it to the NBA Finals. Miami Heat and the LA Lakers. Yeah, not too surprised that the Lakers are there. I have to admit, I was a little bit surprised that the Heat made it. I would have never thought you would have had Boston, Miami in the Eastern Conference Finals. I probably would have thought, as most folks, you've probably been looking at Toronto and Milwaukee going to the finals. But we have the upstart Heats. So let's start to get into it here. If you've not yet subscribed to the channel, please do so. We're running these stats all the way through the playoffs, and like I say, we're now into the finals here. So tonight we have LeBron James coming in at 15,500 on Fanduel, 13,200 on DraftKings. He's been averaging 56 points overall for the playoffs, coming off a monster 73-point game. So of course, there's definitely a lot to like about him. He is definitely the leading scorer with all these players from both these teams here. So definitely a guy that you're going to see populate a lot of the MVP spots in FanDuel. I'd imagine in DraftKings as well. Most of you folks know there's a salary multiplier, so we do have to keep that into consideration. Coming in right behind James is Davis. He is coming in at 14,500 on FanDuel. Only 12,000 on DraftKings, been averaging 50 points overall for the playoffs. The last round, a little bit underwhelming, 46 points. I didn't mention it, but James had 53 that last series. James started off a little bit slow, and then, like I mentioned, had a monster game. Davis, for the most part, was pretty consistent. Game 3, he only had 30 points, but other than that, he was usually right around 50 points. So, again, this is a guy, he'll populate, I'm sure, a lot of MVP spots in FanDuel. He'll be in a lot of that second-tier spot that they have on FanDuel. Like I mentioned, with him being so much cheaper than James, that is definitely a guy that I think makes sense to be your MVP on DraftKings. Okay, and then from here, now I think this is probably seems a little bit backwards to me, at least with the FanDuel pricing. They have Butler at 14,000, and Adebayo is 13,500. So overall for the playoffs, Butler's averaged 39 points, 43, and then we go back that last round. Adebayo was a monster. He had 48-point games. That last game, 57 points. He had another game, 59 points. The third game, and Butler, I mean, he had some good performances, but I had talked about this is in that last series, there was a couple times I had him in that MVP spot, and I just got to the point where I just had dropped it. And that maybe even goes back like to starting the playoffs. And then I think it was by that second round, I started to fade him, other than like some lineups where I used him more so I could fit in more salary into the utility spots, or the other slots, I should say, with some of these other players, and I dropped like some of the higher guys. And that still might be a scenario. It's definitely a play from a contrarian standpoint, too, with those guys, because he on FanDuel, for example, he won't be in that many MVP spots. I mean, he'll be in there, but compared to like James and Davis and Adebayo, I think he's going to be the fourth guy that would be in line for that. Now, if we go over to DraftKings, they got the pricing flip flop. Adebayo's 10,600 and Butler's only 9,200. So with the 9,200, especially amongst all those guys, that's somebody, if he comes out and gives you a 40-point game, that price tag, that could end up boding pretty well for you. But again, let's just see here. He broke 40, 2 games that last series. The prior series, only 1 game, or no, 2. And then, it looked like he maybe did it twice in that other round. So he's got a couple games in him, but it just doesn't seem like you see him like really getting like those monster games anymore, like 45 or 50 points or anything like that. So anyhow, it'll be interesting to see how he performs this series. Now, something too with the series, we know we at least have 4 games, and so and we've seen these guys play. So there's probably maybe like certain rules you might want to consider, especially if you do mass lineups. Like there might be certain core plays where you're like, hey, I'm just going to try to stick with these. And I think that's pretty smart to come up with some certain rules and just stick with them for all series. It might be a certain player where you might not have in the player pool. Maybe like a Olenek or somebody like that, maybe McGee. You might just be like, you know what, fuck it. I'm not going to put them in any of my lineups. If for some reason they go off, then so be it. It's just, I'm not going to waste money for potentially 4 to 7 games, even chasing those guys. And that just means one night it just took me out of potential for first, then so be it. And I think I'm probably going to do that with some of those guys and just not even waste my time on it. I think that we can get a lot of variety with some of the mid-tier and utility type players. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about those players, but just something to keep in mind overall, that you've got these games. It's not like typical single game slate or showdown slate where it's just different teams every single day and it's always changing. And here, because of these same teams, we can sit there and try to have these rules. And like I was saying too about those rules, it might be too, like say for me, for a GPP player, I might be like, you know what, I am going to throw McKee and like Olenek and Morris in every single lineup because I do know they're going to be lower owned. And if they do happen to hit, it might be a huge takedown. So there could be something to be say if that's going to be the approach. Do it that way as well. I think what happens though is that people end up chasing performance, and it's the recency bias. I'm sure a lot of you guys heard about. And so it's like, oh, they start off and they don't play certain guys, and then they blow up, and they're like, oh, I want to play this guy now, and then they do, and then of course this person just comes back down to earth, and then that getting into that pattern. So it's always like you're just a day late and a dollar short, unfortunately. So so just some things to consider here, on what approaches you might have. And now if you're a cash lineup, you're just doing a couple lineups, then some of those players you just probably don't even consider at all. You just keep a real small player pool and you just kind of ride it out. But anyhow, just a couple of thoughts before we get into this next tier guys. But like I mentioned, those top 4 guys are going to be the big studs. That's who are going to dominate for me on Fanduel, which I primarily play all my lineups on. James, Davis, and Iguodala are going to be in my top spot. And actually, I'm going to even start off just with James and Davis, and I'll start to build out a bio in there later. And then as we go down to the second spot, the first spot's a 2 times point multiplier, the second's 1.5. I'm going to build that pool, and now it's going to include all 4 of those guys. Harrow is a classic example of, like I mentioned, about chasing performance. When this whole playoff started, I always just had him in my utility spot, and then it was like, wow, this guy's amazing. So I threw him up to that 3rd spot. Never considered him for the 4th or the 5th spot. And he goes out. He had that monster game. Was a game 5 where he scored 37 points, had 47 fantasy points. And so of course I expand my pool to include him in that 2nd spot, and he comes nowhere near close to that type of performance. So that's exactly what I'm talking about. So that day after, I would have been, and he only had of course 17 points, right? So I would have been better just being like, all right, yeah, he had a big game, and unfortunately didn't do as well as I wanted, but the chances are he's not going to happen again, and it didn't. So that's exactly what I'm talking about right there. So it's kind of like, just try to maybe stick with it and just try to route it out with my example, knowing sometimes that it's not going to work out for you. Now if you're just cash lineup, that's the beauty of it, is it can work out for you for every night. Me, I'm like coming from that GPP, doing a lot of lineups where sometimes there can be a potential to have like a lot of common type lineups too. So all right, from here, and with Hero, just kind of finishing my thoughts on him overall for the playoffs, 30 points, but that last round 39 points, so just a monster performance. And again, it might be that he potentially does go up in that spot. That will definitely make you a little bit more contrarian, and that is a guy that I would see a good play if you did want to make yourself contrarian, to maybe put him up there. Now on DraftKings, where we really need to get value versus the raw points on FanDuel, I like him potentially to go into that MVP spot. Like I say, that if he does have one of those games, and maybe if you play both slates, that's something too, where you can maybe make your rules on one slate a little bit different than the other, and then that way you kind of have this albatross betting, or you're hedging your bet basically, going, all right, hey, I didn't have a certain player in my FanDuel lineups. All right, so be it. I might not take first there overall, but I've got a good chance on this DraftKings or something like that. So, all right, let's get down to Dragic here. And I kind of felt like their performances flip-flopped. Dragic, the first round series, he averaged 36 points. Then he was down to 34, and then only 31 this last series. Overall for the playoffs, he's averaging about 33.5 points there. So I think with Harrow's emergence, that did kind of impact Dragic to some degree. Minutes, though, have been relatively consistent. They were 34 that first round, 35 and 34. So at least we're not seeing his minutes go down. Like Kendrick Nunn, I finally took him right out of even my spreadsheet pool because he hasn't even played, I think, last like 3 games now. So between Robinson, Harrow, and Dragic, look, those guys are basically taking down those, the guard spots there for the most part. So him, that's a guy there for me. I'm not gonna. And again, that kind of goes back. He had some huge performances, so he used to dominate that second spot, or not dominate, but he would be into there. Where I more dropped him down onto Fanduel, just going down into that third spot, and I don't think I'm gonna have him go up there. Like I say, like with Harrow and Dragic, I'm probably not gonna really chase those lineups, and if I do, it might be just very very small amount of it. All right, Rondo in Dragic, I guess I didn't really mention this, but he's 10,500 on FanDuel, 8,600 DraftKings, so he's a little bit more expensive on DraftKings compared to Harrow. All right, now here with Rondo, 10,000 on FanDuel, 5,400 on DraftKings, so that's a pretty attractive price. Last series, came back down to earth a little bit. He had been hurt for the very first round, the second round series against Houston. He came in, had 26 minutes, 31 points. And then now this series has been only averaging 21 minutes and about 23 or 24 points. That's a guy for me. I had him going back on that second round series. He came in to populate that third spot on FanDuel. So now I'm kind of in that boat. Do I even want to have him do that anymore? And I probably will, just because the Lakers are such a unique team. It's like basically, for them, just on the Lakers, like Davis and James are almost always going to be in their top 2 leading scorers from a fantasy standpoint. And then from there, as you guys know, I mean, it could be Rondo, it might be KCP, it might be Green, it might be Kuzma, it might be Howard now. So it's just so hard to say with that part of it. It's probably makes sense to throw somebody in there. But I tell you what, at the same time, too, I do like more of that. The Heat's players like Dragic and Harrow, Crowder, even Robinson. I think those guys have more upside than any of the Lakers guys too. So I wouldn't really be surprised when it's all said and done with that. You're going to see a lot of that pro spot, the 1.2 times multiplier in FanDuel. For me personally, we'll probably have a lot of Miami Heat players there. It just seems to kind of work out well. And I like this. I like this overall series. It seemed like we were just so top heavy for the Western Conference between the top 2 guys on the Lakers, like I mentioned. Then we got Murray and Jokic. And then it's just all these have-beens that are just fucking impossible. Like they're up and down performance with the Michael Porters and the Jeremy Grants of the world, and like I mentioned with all the Lakers. Whereas in here, like we've got like a really good solid group of guys with the Heat that aren't real expensive, that are going to fit real nicely into that spot, I feel. Now I can see though on DraftKings, all that being said, is that might be where I wouldn't be surprised with some of those Heat players that you can get cheaper, that those guys are going to be in some of those top lineups because somebody's going to go off. That's not going to be Butler, Adebayo. And with them being so cheap, like I say, I can see those leading some very profitable nights for some folks. All right, Crowder here is a guy, just really good, solid ball. Overall for the playoffs, he really upped his game. The first round only averaged about 22 points, but then 27 and 27. Overall for the playoffs, 26 points, 31 minutes. Like I say, there's a lot to like there. Just good, solid players. Gets in there and rebounds. Really consistent for the most part. He did have that 14-point game going back a couple games ago, about 3 games back. But before that, I mean, man, it's like he's always like over 20, usually over 25 for the most part. He was a guy that I never had populate into that third spot. And I don't know if he ever really quite had a performance where he would have been in there. Maybe, yeah, not even that last game. Well, I guess there's 2 sets of teams here, but he did 36 points that first game. That might have put him in there, but that for me is a rule. I haven't done that so far, and like, why start now? I just don't think it makes sense. If he had us one of those nights, then so be it. All right, coming in right behind him, we have Duncan Robinson. Again, just I guess he's like the least attractive out of like that core group of the Miami guys. They basically have a 6-man rotation. Crowder, Robinson, Butler, Dragic, and Adebayo are starting, and then really Hero is coming off playing buck the minutes off of the bench. Robinson, though, you guys have seen, he's had a couple halves where he'd hit was it game 2? I think he hit maybe like 4 or 5 threes in the first half, and then I think he did that like game 6. One of those games he had like 18 or 19 points at halftime I think it was the second to last game, and he only finished with like 25, and I can't remember, it might, because he did 25 2 games in a row. But that's a guy there, more just a utility spot. Don't really know about him on DraftKings. Like, I would probably, I mean, Jay Crowder at 6,200 versus Duncan Robinson. Like, if you were going to do that play, I would probably go there. I mean, I think Rondo's even got more upside at 5,400 than Robinson. So I don't really like Robinson. Yeah, I don't like him as far as being an MVP on DraftKings. It just doesn't make sense to me. Danny Green, he's also 9,000. A little bit up and down performance. Overall, I guess he's been, unfortunately, progressively getting a little bit worse. He had 20 points the first round, about 18, and then 18 this last round. Minutes overall for the playoffs have been averaging 25. Minutes been relatively consistent, almost about 18 and a half points overall for the playoffs. 4,200 on DraftKings. He's just a utility guy. I wouldn't throw him up into that second spot. I'm not seeing it there. Between him and Duncan Robinson, with them being the same price tag and you're not doing a lot of lineups, I would prefer Robinson over Green. Crowder, I would prefer over both of them if you could buy up and get him. Okay, KCP. He came back in that last series, had some pretty good games. 8,500 on Fanduel, 4,600 on DraftKings. First round series averaged 26 points, 18 minutes. Second round, 28 points, 28 minutes, only about 12 points. And then this last one, he came out that first game, he had 29 minutes, almost 27 points. And yeah, I guess, with him, I guess why he's sticking out in my head, because his price tag was around 7,500 for a lot of that last series. And it was really kind of ridiculous where, I mean, I mentioned in one of my videos back, the 75 price tag was such, and everybody, even like some of these guys below him, like Howard was more expensive, Kuzma, Caruso, Iguodala wasn't even playing at that point, Morris was more expensive, and so he was like the one guy where it would allow you to like have him in your lineup and then still have to have two of these three between Davis, Jokic, and LeBron, and then like say Jamal Murray also in there, so you could basically have three of those four. KCP, and then it allowed you to buy up, and so he was like fucking like 42% owned on FanDuel. I mean, that's telling you that they need to get some diversity in their pricing, because a guy like KCP, I mean, that's messed up that a guy like that has 40% ownership. And then they bumped him up to 8,500, and then right around that time, yeah, he came out and threw out like a 26 minutes and only 8 points. They bumped up his salary. Now, I mention all that because when that happened, Caruso went down to only 7,000, which Caruso, I mean, overall, has averaged more points than KCP. And so, we'll just talk about Caruso since we're down there. Yeah, he's 7,000, only 3,000 on DraftKings. That last game out, really nice game, 25 minutes, 22 points. Kind of quiet there. I had a couple really poor games, but then, yeah, came back pretty strong. And he was in that lineup too, because all of a sudden he became the common guy. So I can kind of see him being a little bit more common now with that. Overall for the playoffs, 24 minutes and 18 points. All right, jumping back up here. Kuzma. Yeah, I thought he might really be poised to have a nice playoff run and really kind of make a name for himself. As far as like a really like up and coming, potentially, I don't know if I'd call him elite or potential to be elite, but like I say, just there's a lot of guys that, like Harrell, for example, is like, wow, this kid's a baller, And Kuzma, yeah, fuck, man. First round, 24 minutes, 19 points. Second round, 24 minutes, about 19 points. Again, this last round, 22 minutes, only 13 points. Overall for the playoffs, 23 minutes, 17 points. So he didn't even, Jesus, yeah, that last round, his best game was 16 points. I don't know. I really don't know anymore with him. I mean, at 8,000, you could almost just say, fucking dump the dude. Not out of the question, at least on FanDuel. So I don't know. I have to think about that. Especially when you get Howard. And I thought he played pretty well, so I'm kind of making that assumption he's going to continue to start. But I don't know. With Howard and I think McGee, I think like I was kind of, when I was talking about those rules earlier, I think he's out for me because Miami just plays a little bit different type of ball. They're closer to more like Houston. So it will be interesting to see what happens with Howard. And Markieff Morris, I could see him starting to play a little bit more minutes. Now, with Howard, to kind of finish my thoughts off with him, he wasn't really relevant. Of course, he didn't even play basically that last series, and then he came in and he played that first game. It was a monster game. 16 minutes, 26 points overall. That series, 20 minutes, and about 20 points. So a point per minute guy. So yeah, there's some potential there if he plays, but it'll be interesting just to see how the minutes work themselves out. So I don't know if I would be. I mean, he was kind of like a guy that was really easy to get by once you figured out he was starting that last round. But now, again, with the way they play, I just see him going a little bit more back to that lineup that they had with that prior series. Iguodala, he all of a sudden kind of became fantasy relevant again in the playoffs. Prior to this, the first round, he played 26 minutes, had about 16 or 17 points. Really nondescript performances. Other than his very last game, he went out and gave you 26 minutes and 25 points. And then just honestly, just completely different, disappeared until the last couple games of this series. Second round, he only played 16 minutes and 13 points. The first couple games of this series, 14 points, about 9-10 minutes, 14 minutes, about 9-10 points, 7 minutes, 1.5 points, 7 minutes, 2.5 points, and then all of a sudden, 27 minutes, 16 points, 19 minutes, 13, and 27 minutes and 26 points. So it's kind of looking to me, it might maybe be the opposite because Boston was playing a little bit more small ball, and he kind of came in. And I did mention more of a 6-man rotation, which with Miami, which they've got their definitely 6 solid guys, but then when Iguodala's minutes went up, you'll go there like Olenek basically didn't like really play. I could see Olenek though. This might maybe change a little bit because this the size of the Lakers, particularly if they want to play that big ball. So anyway, it's just going to be kind of interesting to see who wants to match up with who. But I think Olenek, even with Olenek, like just going against really Davis, it doesn't even need to be really like that. That like the big men are let's say that he's going to come in and he's guarding like McGee or Howard or anything like that. I mean, of course he can, but even if the Lakers are dropping those guys, I can see Olenek coming up. I can see Bam Adebayo having some games where he's going to get into foul problem in this series too. And I suppose that can work with like Davis and the Lakers, and maybe Howard or McGee gets a bump up. But I just think with Adebayo really being their big man, that's maybe a little bit more prone to happen for him. And if that's the case, and then Olenek will come up. But that's something for me. I need to kind of make that decision myself at 6,500 between him and McGee. Even though looking at last series, you're both like, it's very easy to it probably makes sense in most cases just not even fuck with him. And same thing with Olenek, like, hey, if he has one good game, so be it. Screw it, he's out. But yeah, all those guys. And then if I had to pick, maybe even Morris, because like I say, I think his minutes are going to come up. He played 20 minutes that last round, but only 14 points. And then this round, 13 minutes, about 8.5 points. And that's kind of similar to the first round series where he played 17 minutes and 11 points. So, will they go up closer to 20 minutes from instead of like 12 to 13? I think it could happen. But even if that does happen, it's not like he's like historically this point per minute producer or he's known to like blow up slates. Whereas like, if you knew Johan or Jordan, thinking football. But anyway, if you had Dwight Howard playing 20 minutes, like guaranteed, you feel pretty good about him going up there and getting you almost 20 points just because the ability to rebound, block some shots and things like that. But again, with some of these other guys, even if they play, it's hard to be excited about them. So anyhow, but yeah, I think that's it. Probably maybe went a little bit longer than it normally would, but I think it's the first game coming up, and it's just kind of interesting to maybe talk about some of these approaches that you have, and maybe just take a moment before you start knocking out lineups just to kind of think like, all right, hey, I'm going to have at least 4 games of these same groups of players. And I honestly, I can't see anybody getting swept on this one, so we're probably going to have 5 or 6 games, but I wouldn't be surprised if it goes 7, to be honest with you. So just keep that in mind and going like, all right, like we've got one game coming up here, but but let's kind of step back and look at it as like a whole. And how do I want to maybe even attack not only the game but this entire series? And I think you guys are going to end up doing well with it. So, all right, guys, go out, kick some ass, and then I'll start working on a video for the Thursday night football game coming up. So, all right, guys, peace out, and I'll see you later.